So there's a lot of tactical and strategic things that you can do to enhance your impact and give your presentation, give your remarks more impact and more memorability. So those are the tactics that we're going to be going through today. So let's start out with a simple concept, repetition, okay? You want to be comfortable with repeating your message over the course of your presentation or your speech. Now, when I say this, a lot of students and clients are hesitant around the concept of repetition because people like to say, I don't want to bore my audience to death. I don't want to annoy them. I don't want to repeat my message incessantly to the point that I sound like a parrot or something. And that's understandable. Of course, you don't want to do it excessively. Nothing should be done excessively. But I would say 90% of the time, the vast majority of presenters and speakers can increase the amount of repetition without taking away from the quality of their presentation. So repeating what specifically? If your message is 100 words, let's say, your main core message, obviously you can't repeat 100 words again and again. So we're talking about a very simple, short phrase, 5-10 words maybe, maximum. You can repeat that more than you might expect without annoying the audience or getting under their skin. And why is it valuable? It's valuable because when you repeat things, you are reinforcing that message. Remember, audiences have very short attention spans. They have a lot of things going on in their mind. They're distracted by a million things, and they easily forget a lot of the words that you're sharing. There's some studies that indicate that people forget 80% of everything they hear within 24 hours. And if you take a step back, you've probably been in that situation yourself. Think about the last presentation you sat in on as an audience member or the last speech, and then think about 24 hours after. How much of that presentation did you actually retain? Just one day later, never mind a week after or 3 weeks later, right? Probably the vast majority of whatever was said in terms of the actual words, you forgot, but you remembered a few key points, a few key ideas, right? That's where the repetition comes in. So you as a presenter or as a communicator, you want to take advantage of the power of repetition to reinforce your key message. In the world of advertising and marketing, we see these tactics. A lot of these tactics that we're going to go through today, we don't have to reinvent the wheel as public speakers or as presenters, right? We can just look at what's already working out there and leverage those techniques and those strategies for our advantage. So think about the power of repetition. It's very significant. And I do think that in most cases, you can repeat your key message, again, short phrase, 1 or 2 sentences max, every couple of minutes throughout your course of your presentation. You can easily do that without it getting excessive. So for example, if you have a 20-minute or 40-minute presentation coming up, every couple of minutes, every 2 or 3 minutes maybe, you can repeat that key message again, and then just kind of continue in that cadence throughout the period. Then that brings us to the second major point, which is minimalism. So minimalism is the idea that you want to strip down and boil down your message into something very simple and straightforward. This is especially a challenge if you have a lot of complex information to share, if you have a lot of technical, detailed information, but it's absolutely necessary if you want to take your message and your speaking to the next level and to really make the impact that you can potentially have. Don't give the audience too much to focus on. It's a classic mistake, and it's a constant temptation when you have tons and tons of information to share. You could incorporate and include so much information, but the key is to curate. Just like imagine yourself as a museum curator, and you're creating an art exhibit with 10 works of art, but you actually have 300 works of art in the storage room. Which are the 10 that you're going to select, right? So what are you going to curate and actually showcase to your audience? That's the key. And it's about minimalism. It's about keeping things simple and straightforward. Overcomplicate the speech, overcomplicate the message, and you're going to lose your audience. They're not going to retain anything. They're not going to remember anything, right? They may think that you're really smart. They may think, wow, this person is really on top of his game. But what are they actually taking away from that presentation? Probably very little. Okay. So don't give them too much to focus on. Help them to focus on just the key items or the key 2 or 3 talking points, maybe 4 maximum, right? And then that ties back into repetition, right? Just beat those points into their head again and again. Thirdly, creative and unexpected wording. There's many ways to go about doing this. Think about words or phrases that are going to connect seemingly disparate ideas that are disconnected from each other on the surface, but when brought together become much more impactful and memorable. So for example, years ago, Thomas Friedman wrote a book. The title was "The World is Flat." Now think about that. The world is flat. That's an unusual sounding phrase. Everybody knows the world is round, almost everybody. So when you say the world is flat and you make that a declarative statement, the title of your book, that is unusual. That gets people's attention, right? It's connecting these very different, disparate ideas. Now, what the book was about globalization. So when Thomas Friedman said the world is flat, what he was saying was, barriers to trade, barriers to migration have come down, making the world feel flat. There was a leveling of barriers and various obstacles for interaction among countries and cities around the world. So he was getting across that idea, but it was an unusual and unexpected turn of phrase, and it became memorable. It doesn't have to necessarily, when you use unusual words or phrases, they don't necessarily have to connect completely disconnected ideas. So an example is the COO of Palantir, who I did an analysis of, and the analysis can be found on the YouTube channel, Cool Communicator. Just one example, he said, "We have been investing maniacally in developing our solution." Investing maniacally. I love that phrase because it's so unusual, right? And when you hear the phrase, the word maniacally, it conveys a certain level of intensity, just a whole other level of passion and commitment to the investment or to the activity in question. He didn't say, "We've been consistently investing in this solution," or "We have been dedicating a lot of investment dollars to this solution." He could have said all those things. But when you say investing maniacally, it's an unusual phrase. It's unexpected, right? So it's something that is creative. And so as a result, it becomes more memorable and more impactful for the audience. Data is the new oil. This is another example. So years ago, Ginny Rometty, who was the former CEO of IBM, was giving a speech. And I did an analysis of her speech at the Economic Club of Chicago, I think back in 2017. And she referred to data being like oil. And most people are probably familiar with the phrase "data is the new oil," right? Today, that's not as, people don't talk about that as much. It's kind of become obvious. But at the time, probably, let's say the early 2010s to mid 2010s, that was a relatively new idea, that data is the new oil. If you just think about that phrasing, it's unusual, it's unexpected. And it's connecting 2 very disconnected concepts. Oil, when you think about oil, whatever you think about, the imagery, the associations that you have with that concept, is probably very different from when you think about data, right? So when people say data is the new oil, of course, they're talking about the essentialness and the critical role that data plays in the economy, in many ways similar to the role that oil has played for many years. And then just one last example of this, Simon Sinek gave a speech, which I analyzed, and all of these speaker analyses can be found on the YouTube channel. He opened the speech talking about leadership. This was his exact phrasing when he first opened his mouth. The very first words that he said were, "I'm embarrassed that I have a career." Right? That's an unusual thing to say. Certainly very unusual to start a speech in front of thousands of people with that phrase, to say, "I'm embarrassed," right? Usually think about your career. You want to puff yourself up. You want to, our expectation, our norm is to be proud of our career, or to expect a speaker to kind of, present themselves in a very high authority way, etc. Simon Sinek went, in exactly the opposite direction. He said, I'm embarrassed that I have a career. And what he was referring to was the fact that, he talks about trust and loyalty. And he talks about a lot of soft skills in leadership in corporate America. And his point was that these ideas should not be controversial. They should not be really new or different, but they are. So it's a little embarrassing that I have to speak about these things, that companies hire me to speak about these themes and these topics. Nevertheless, that is his career, as a speaker and as a leadership expert. So, creative and unexpected wording. Chances are there's a lot of little moments throughout your presentation that you can start experimenting with these. So far, we have repetition, repeating your key message multiple times. We have minimalism, keeping it simple and straightforward so the audience is easy to digest your ideas. And we have creative and unexpected wording and phrasing.